Hey everybody, we are building with blocks. This is Blocks by Google, a free 3D modeling program. And today's lesson is about using the shape tool in blocks. So in our controller, the very first tool we got up here is called Insert Shape. And by default, it usually starts you with a cube. So this is the tool, the shape tool, for building our basic objects. We have several different shapes that we can work with here, several different flavors of the shape tool. And we'll look at them all during this class. There are also some basic controls, how we build these shapes, and it will involve both hands. So this class is about building the basic shapes, and we will be covering the other tools in classes of their own. For this class, I am not going to be using the grid. I'm not going to worry about everything lining up just yet. So freeform, starting with the cube, here's how we make shapes. It's as simple as holding down your trigger to start drawing your shape. And when it looks the way you want, let go. And it will hold that shape. Undo. So the cube shape is for any kind of rectangle. It doesn't have to be a perfect cube. It could be a horizontal. It could be a tall vertical like a skyscraper. It could be like a pizza box. Any kind of rectangular shape is what we got coming from this Insert Shape tool. So if you want any basic shape, wherever you start, that's where those edges are going to line up. So if I try perfectly align with the camera, then now as long as I hold down my trigger, no matter how I move my hand, it's going to stay lined up with the camera. But you can see when I draw it bigger, you can see I wasn't perfectly straight up and down, perfectly 90 degrees. That's where the grid tool comes in. If you have the grid tool turned on, now your wall will be exactly 90 degrees, or your ceiling will be exactly 90 degrees. I'm not going to worry about that for now. No grid. I can draw them at any weird angle I want, because that's how I like my shapes. So the cube is all about rectangular shapes. Now, if you do want a perfect cube where all 6 sides are exactly the same, that's very difficult to do freehand, even with the grid. At least with a grid, you can sort of count the dots here and get really close so you can see. I can count the dots. So I'm the same number of dots up and down, same number of dots, that type of thing. But that's a pain in the butt. Here's where your other hand comes in. When I'm using the shape tool, if I hold down the trigger and draw the shape, it will be a perfect cube. Even if I turn off the grid and draw it at any old angle, as long as I hold down the trigger, it will stay a perfect cube. It won't necessarily snap to a grid, but it will always remain equal-sided. No matter how I move my hand, it will stay a perfect cube. If I let go of the trigger too early, it distorts. Grab the trigger again, back to perfect cube. So I can move my hand however I want, then perfect cube it. And it's a perfect cube. So now if I pick it up and wave it around, you can see it is a perfect cube. So the shape tool, wave it around normally for any old shape, or hold down the trigger for the perfect version of the shape. So now that we got the basics, let's start bringing our thumb control here. You can see how big this cube is to start with. If I move my thumb trigger, in this case I'm using an index, so I have the joystick. If you're using a Vive wand, you'll want to use the thumb pad. But by pulling the joystick up and down, you can see how it makes my shape bigger or smaller. That's really just the starting size. So I could start with a very fine piece and then go for a bigger shape as I get bigger. And then get even bigger. start that big, and we're going to get some very large rectangles drawn. So, up and down size of the shape. If you hold it, you could nudge it step by step, or if you hold it up, hold it up, it gets bigger. Hold it down, it gets smaller. There is a limit to how big it'll get. That's too big. There we go. Normal size square. So up and down in size, left and right is how you choose between the different shapes. Square is just one of them. We actually have 5. The first one, on the farthest left anyway, is the cone shape. So you'll notice it's got a flat bottom and a pointy end. Remember with our cube, when I'm moving it around, I really have 3 directions. I can go left and right. Let's call that X. I can go up and down. Let's call that Y. I can also come at the camera and away. So 3 different dimensions, we'll call that Z, for a cube. If I'm making a cone, those 3 dimensions are still in play. Dimension 1, pointy end. How pointy do you want it? Dimensions 2 and 3 have to do with that flat base. You'll notice I'm going to have the base coming at the camera, pointy behind me, coming at the camera. Up and down, left and right, are changing the shape of the base of the cone. Now I'm going to move it so it's at an angle. So the pointy direction, but if I now move this way around, you can see how it affects and distorts the shape of the base of the cone, whether it's narrow or fat or long and skinny and very pointy. However you move your hands in that third direction gives you the base. Direction 1 is length. Directions 2 and 3, how round, how big do you want that base? Now the perfect version of the cone just keeps the base as a perfect circle. And it also keeps the length of the cone the same as the diameter of the circle. So it stays a perfect cone. So if I do it normally with no trigger, long, skinny, or I can make it, instead of round, I can make it a long oval cone. But if I hold down the trigger and draw a cone, it's that same shape, just bigger or smaller. The pointy end is always at the same angle. You cannot make it more pointy with the trigger down. Likewise, base on you, with a trigger down, base stays a circle. I can't have an oval or an ellipsoid. It's always a perfect circle. So trigger gives you the perfect cone of any size you want. So shape square, shape cone. Bigger or smaller, bigger or smaller. After cone, we have the sphere shape. Work with me here. Sphere shape. And again, with no trigger, I can make it squishy or stretchy in all 3 directions. Maybe I'll make it like a zeppelin. Here we go. So now I've got this shape that's like a cigar. I'll make a blimp out of it. But if I make that shape and I trigger, it's a perfect sphere every time. Now, one thing you'll notice, this sphere, even if I make it really big, it's always going to have the same number of sides. If I make spheres in tilt brush, you'll notice it'll have more and more sides the bigger it gets. Whereas this, it's just making those facets a little bit bigger. But the sphere gets bigger, but it doesn't get more complicated. It's still a very simple shape. So a tiny sphere has the same number of sides as a large sphere. Spheres. Tiny, large. But you'll notice it looks rougher at this large size. Sphere shape tool, trigger for perfect sphere. Non-trigger for zeppelins and ovals and that type of stuff. Sphere, cone, sphere, square, column, or cylinder. Like the cone, it's got a round base and it's got a length. So if I click and drag this way, it's a tall cone. But I can then make it oblong or oval or ellipsoid instead of just a circular column. So if I do it this way, you can see how I can stretch it into different patterns. Now it cannot be angular, not a cone, not a pyramid. It's always a nice even column. It can't be fluted or swell in the middle. It's always going to be perfect up and down. You cannot make it curved. You cannot make it angled. It's always a flat 90-degree column. We can modify it later, but that's a whole different lesson. For now, we're just looking at these. So the perfect version of a column can be tall, but you'll notice it gets as wide as it gets tall. Sort of like the cone. It's going to be a fixed shape. And trigger finger means you're just changing the size, not the form of it. So I cannot do a tall pillar with a trigger finger. It's always going to snap to be just as fat as it is tall. So trigger finger columns are always going to be thick pedestals. If you want tall, skinny ones, and you wanted a perfect circle, you really have to be careful to get it just right. Now, what's nice when you're doing a column freehand, I'm going to do this base towards the camera. Watch this. I'm going to make it a little bigger, thumb up and down, bigger, smaller, and now I'm going to pull it so it's tall and skinny towards the camera. Now, as I move my hand around, you can see how it makes it distorted, which can make it tough to get a good perfect circle. But if I try making it small, it can only get so small. It won't get any skinnier. Or if I go flat, it won't go any flatter. So if I try making it both skinny and flat, you'll notice it only gets so small. And the smallest size is a perfect circle. So you can make a long, skinny pillar a perfect circle. You just have to pay attention a little bit. Go for a larger scale so that the smallest size is a perfect circle. Easily done, just pay attention a little bit. And I'm having too much fun throwing away shapes. So we've got our cone and perfect cone. We've got sphere and perfect sphere. We have square, perfect cube. We have column, perfect cylinder. Final shape we're going to look at is a ring shape, sometimes called a torus or a donut. And yeah, what you see is what you got. Now if you click and drag, now we're going to make tubes. Tubes can be fun to play with because now we can actually see through things, look down things. Hello! So these are shapes we can make using this torus, this ring shape tool. Standard click, single click makes a perfect little donut. I'm going to make my tool bigger. Donut. Click and hold will make it smaller for this. Makes a tube. Now this tube is always going to be straight. It's sort of like a cylinder in that we can make it different sizes, different oblong, different length, but we can't curve it. We can't bend it. It can't be a diagonal tube. With a trigger finger, yes, it stays a perfect circle, but again, it stays a set length. We can't change it. So a perfect ring stays a ring. Without the trigger, we can pull it down into a tube. So this shape, a lot of fun for making base pieces. This is also a fun one to modify. Take it and pull up points to make a crown, or take it and pull out wings to make a flying saucer, that type of thing. But these shapes are starting primitive shapes. One of the troubles with this torus is you can't really make it skinny. It's going to be that thickness no matter how we make it. Once we get to modifying tools, then we can take it, shrink it down, stretch it out, that type of thing. But for now, these are always going to follow that proportion, the base proportion. Later tools will modify it, but for now, we're just going to stick with these basic shapes, all built into the Shapes tool. 5 different shapes we get by going left and right. Up and down changes the size. And the trigger finger on the other hand makes these shaped perfect shapes. So hopefully these tools will help you get started building your models. We're going to have other classes where we're building up out of many pieces, but these shape tools are how you're going to make these main basic pieces. We got all 5 mainly controlled with your palette hand, and we'll bring in these other tools coming up. If you enjoyed this, let us know with likes and subscriptions so that you can see the new videos as they come out. Tell your friends if they're interested in 3D modeling but are kind of overwhelmed by things like Blender. Blocks is great because it simplifies everything so you can learn the concepts before you have to learn a whole host of tools and menus. Best of all, anything you make in Blocks, you can then export for use in any of those programs. Blender, Unity, Tilt Brush can all use the shapes we make here to do more advanced stuff later on. This gives us just quick and easy ways to build it. So I hope this was fun. I hope this is helpful. Build these shapes. I'm not going to try to write the word subscribe out of shapes. That's a little too overwhelming, especially at this point. So have fun, and we'll see you more for building with blocks.